Correct? Great. All right. Welcome, everybody. Good afternoon. Beautiful day here in Washington, D.C. The cherry blossoms are out. Hopefully you are going to be in D.C. soon and able to see them before they blow away. Tell us where you're logging in from around the country. We'd love to know where our attendees are coming into us from. We got Canada, do we have Dubai out there, California, Tennessee? Laura, where are you logging in from today?
I'm in St. Louis, Missouri.
All right, let's see our Missouri contingency out there. Craig, how about you?
New Jersey, right outside of New York.
Okay, Jerseyites, let's see ya. John.
Suburb of Boston.
Boston, all right. We need some Massachusetts folks here. Let's see the New Englanders.
She brought any Ted Drew's ice cream.
Did you bring any Ted Drew's ice cream, Laura? I'm being told.
I wish. I wish.
North Carolina, all right, go Duke. We've got Duke fans.
Hey,
All right. I guess we've got some Duke fans here. Anybody else? Tell us where you are. Baltimore, welcome. Love to see my neighbors here. Rhode Island, hello. Boston, all right, there you go. Ryan's coming in from Boston, John.
Excellent.
All right, excellent. Ed Hammond, welcome, Ed. Go Duke. Maryland, Detroit, welcome everybody. Good afternoon. Okay, Alaska, goodness. Excellent. Chicago, welcome. Mark Siegel, great to see you. A frequent flyer, we love that. We have an incredible program for you this afternoon. So thrilled you could join us this afternoon. And this is a great panel. A lot of talk about FHIR lately. We will be digging into that again today. Many of you are fresh off of Vive and HIMSS shows. So certainly this is top of mind for a lot of you. Welcome. Arizona, welcome. Tennessee, welcome. Pennsylvania. We want to keep a real active chat box today. So as we're going through the session, tell us what you're thinking. If you want to talk about the Final Four, that's fine. If you want to throw a FHIR comment or question in there, we'd love to see that as well. But we definitely have our Tennessee, New Jersey, and Massachusetts folks here represented fully. So welcome. Good to see everybody. I've got a couple of quick opening comments to make, and then we're going to just dig right into the session today. So why don't we go through those? My partner in crime here, Emma, take us to the next slide here. Great. So this is an EHI Executives for Health Innovation webinar. And if you have not been with us recently, you may not know we changed our name recently, but we are still EHI. So welcome. EHI is a group of executives. We're a catalyst for healthcare transformation, and we convene all sorts of industry experts and diverse leaders to talk about different opportunities for really unlocking innovation. So welcome. Our core focus areas right now: modernizing public health, health equity, virtual care, and privacy and security. These are just a smattering of some of the topics that we've been talking about. And if you haven't joined us for any of our webinars recently, they are all online and available, ehidc.org, for you to dig into some of these topic areas. Go to the next slide. This is a list of some of the executives who are part of our leadership council. If you do not see your organization's logo up there, you need to myself or Amy through the chat box today, and we will get in touch with you. We do all kinds of education, research, and advocacy, and we want to get you engaged. So please reach out to us if you would like to get involved with the group, speak on a webinar, get involved, attend something, work in a work group. On the horizon, a lot of really great stuff coming up. We have a fabulous session coming up on April 5th next week on innovative technologies in public health with a great group of speakers next week. We'll be talking about the future of oncology care. This is a really neat session involving Jasper Health, value-based patient-centered care on April 20th. It should be really interesting stuff, how we can support oncology patients. We'll be talking about ensuring provider data isn't the source of surprises. May 19th. And then we've got a great policy briefing actually coming up today, right after this webinar, all things privacy, featuring our very own Alice Leiter, who's got some great, exciting news that we released last week as well. Go ahead. All right, next slide. And I do want to just let people know we released a new report last week on protecting health data outside the healthcare system and announced a new partnership that we have with BBB, protecting consumer health data and pulling together a self-regulatory model for the healthcare industry, and a great work moving forward with BBB. You can read all about that in this new report, which I would love for you to download. Emma, Brian, I'm going to ask you if you could stick a link there in the chat box so people can access that report. I encourage you to dig into that. Really, really interesting work happening. And again, we need you involved. So please reach out to us. Next slide. And a big, big thank you today to Wellsheet. As many of you know, EHI is a very small nonprofit, and we would not be able to bring all of this great programming to you and educational programs and advocacy efforts without the generous support of organizations like Wellsheet, who do allow us to share this information and promote a real great forum for executives like yourselves to talk and explore these topics. So thank you. And as I mentioned, we have a very, very incredibly influential and esteemed group of experts with us today. We have the John Glasser, who's the executive in residence of Harvard Medical School. Many of you know him as the former CIO of Partners Healthcare, CEO at Siemens Healthcare, SVP, and SVP at Cerner Population Health. John, his experience is vast, and I would say his comedy is well known. So John, we look forward to your one-liners today as well. And we've got the wonderful Dr. Laura Kroupa, who's the former Chief Medical Officer of the VA, Office of Electronic Health Records Modernization. She has some incredible I want to say background and experiences that she's going to share with us on the journey that they've taken today, and just a wealth of experience and perspective really on what this looks like. So welcome, Laura. If I can call you Laura, is that right?
Yes,
Great.
please.
And we've got Craig Lamoli, who's the CEO and founder of Wellsheet, who's actually in the field digging into this and dealing with a lot of these issues on a day-to-day basis. So Craig, great to have you. Welcome.
Thank you.
Great. All right, well, let's just jump right in. And I'd actually love to start with John. So John actually just published last week, and we're going to stick this into the chat box for you, a great article in Harvard Business Review talking about interoperability issues and really explaining, I would say, in plain English, kind of what the API issue is. I know, again, a lot of you are fresh off of Vive and HIMSS and have been dealing with this, but let's just kind of level set a little bit here, John, and explain to folks kind of what is the issue, where have we come from, and kind of where are we headed?
Perfect. Thanks, Jen, and it's a pleasure to be here with my colleagues and with all of you. And I thought I'd start given the references to Duke basketball, and I see the fact that my colleague Ed Hammond is on this. I went to Duke as an undergrad. I graduated a long time ago, 1976, so that makes me officially an old person. But I remember a couple of years ago looking at 50 years of Duke basketball history, and during that 50-year period of time, for 9 seasons, they were 500 or below, you know, and I was there for 4. So I caught the trough of Duke basketball. It was not hard to get a seated camera at this point. So I don't know, as soon as I left, they started to win. I'm not sure what the relationship is, et cetera. Anyway, that aside, obviously we hope to do well and obviously make sure that the Tar Heels go home early on this thing. So let me just a little bit about FHIR, and I suspect you all know this, so we'll make this relatively quick because you want to get to the people who are going to go into more detail about more consequential stuff. When I was a CIO, and I was one for 22 years, and you wanted one application to talk to another or exchange data, you wrote an interface to do this stuff. And these were generally idiosyncratic, my interface were a little bit different than my colleagues next door, a little bit different than somebody else's, et cetera, even though they were fundamentally between the same two applications, highly redundant, highly inefficient, very expensive, very time consuming. But, it did the job. But nonetheless, it was kind of like, pre-industrial revolution, where you sort of made each, piece of machinery by hand rather than had sort of mass production. So in our collective efforts to improve interoperability, and we all know the reasons why exchanging data across the healthcare system has a lot of value for care purposes and research purposes and public health, quality improvement, all that stuff here. There have been a number of challenges and barriers, but one of them is sheer inefficiency and the difficulty and the expense of getting two applications to talk to each other. So what we've seen in the last couple of years is the advent of FHIR, and you all know that that's an acronym for Fast Healthcare Interoperability Resources, which is at the end of the day is two things. One of which is the standard. So it says, listen, if you want to read a somebody's Mrs. Smith's medications, here's the standard to what we mean by medications, sort of the vocabulary for the drugs, the route, the dose, the kinds of things that come with retrieving or filing a medication. It's a standard. It just sort of lays out. And there's all kinds of resources. There's lots and lots of them. There's meds and there's problems and there's even actions like, medication ordering or medication renewal, things like that. So anyway, there's a standard. And it's also a very thoughtful standard and pretty well enforced standard in terms of remaining standard. I mean, one of the challenges we've had over the years is standards start creeping, and so they get tuned for all kinds of reasons. Let's tune this and add this, et cetera. It doesn't take too long for the standard to not be a standard anymore. It's just sort of a collection of sort of variations that occur here. But anyway, FHIR has been laid out as a standard. Let's see. That's sort of the first part. The second part is it leverages APIs or application programming interfaces, which are basically sets of code and sort of technical conventions that say, if you want to read a med list, call this API and it will retrieve it and serve it up to you. And APIs are, all over the place in our lives. So, if you use Google or Facebook to get to a wide range of apps, they sort of send your credentials off to it, even though Google and Facebook don't own any of these apps. There's an API that does the exchange between the sort of authentication layer and the app that you're trying to use, et cetera. Similarly, I perhaps like you, I have an account with Morgan Stanley. You may have it with somebody else, but nonetheless, they have this software that allows you to pull, your accounts from Bank of America or wherever you have them to create an aggregate financial picture, which shows that fundamentally I'll be impoverished within 5 years. So nonetheless, it is the ability to bring together, these diverse sets of data here. So it's pretty common, across a wide range of industries, and now making a big sort of debut or splash in healthcare. Now, what makes this sort of particularly exciting is not only is it a great standard, leveraging APIs, which is a pretty current, well understood way of getting data, but the federal governments have come out and said, listen, at the end of the day, we're the largest employer in the country, we're the largest provider of care in the country, and we're the largest insurer of care in the country. And if you want to do business with us, plus we're here to protect the common good, you got to use the FHIR APIs. And so we're going to require these to be part of certified electronic health records and health plans. And you got till the end of this year, frankly, to get that in place. So here comes dad. Dad's going to lay down the law and make all this stuff occur. And, the industry notices those who sell to the industry and those who are, providing care or financing care, et cetera. So in addition to this sort of federal request, perhaps it's a nice way to put it, we all do this, is that you have through HL7, and for disclosure, I'm a co-chair of the advisory council of HL7, 500 organizations that come together to develop new standards and implementation guides. And so there's a lot, and it covers the waterfront, providers and health plans and government agencies and life sciences companies and technology companies, all coming together to work on these standards and make them happen. So huge industry push behind all of this stuff and making sure that we do this. Plus, it covers a really diverse waterfront, not only clinical care, but insurance payments, public health activity, clinical research. So it covers this wide range of use cases. So we have this great standard that is, well managed. We have lots of industry behind it. We have a federal requirement that you implement it, and there's a good range of activity to sort of cover all the things we need to cover. Now, does this make the data flow, automatically? No. Organizations have to decide to do that and to go out of their way to make it happen, but it certainly drops a lot of barriers. And in fact, what we've done in some discussions and preparing for this article that Jen has mentioned is in the chat, people would say, listen, the effort and time required to do drop interface is dropped by order of magnitude to 2 orders of magnitude. That's huge, absolutely huge, to go off and to sort of make that challenge a whole lot less of a challenge than it was before. So Jen, that in a nutshell, and as Jen mentioned, there's that article, there's more to learn, and I look forward to hearing my colleagues talk and taking it from here.
Dear. Great. Thank you so much, John. I think that was a great way to kind of level set a little bit. And it's really helpful, I think, for folks to kind of get that in plain English. Laura, let's turn to you a little bit. And I think, part of the reason we've had so much interest in this webinar today is because of, the experience at the VA. So the VA, I would say, is famous for being one of the first organizations to really organize the plethora of clinical data out there. They're initial EHRs, and they, of course, face the initial challenges with pulling it all together. Talk to us a little bit about the journey at the VA and what they've gone through and kind of what they learned and what we can learn from them.
Sure, thanks. So first I have to preface this that I did my residency at Kansas, and so I'm going Rock Chalk Jayhawk all the way. So the VA, as you mentioned, it's been in the EHR business, though we didn't know it at the time, and I was actually there for the beginning stages of it, since the late 80s. And so when it came time for us, when the decision was made that we were going to go to a commercial electronic health record, one of the biggest concerns was what happens to this plethora of data that we've gathered over the years. And being a clinician in the system, since 1987, I felt a very strong attachment to that data because that was data that people have been putting into the system for years and years. And so so we really wanted to make sure we did not leave that data behind going to a new system, even though that is obviously the way many organizations approach that transformation. So the decision was made that we were going to bring the clinical data, historic clinical data, into the EHR, as well as making sure that there is interoperability among all the different medical centers in real time. And I think many people don't appreciate that the VA really is a decentralized system right now. There are 130 different VISTA systems. Each medical center or healthcare system has its own version of VISTA. It's very much the same. There's standards across that, but truthfully, if I'm practicing in St. Louis, I cannot see in real time in an interoperable way what's happening in Tampa. I can view it on a viewer, but I cannot actually interact with that data. So anyway, not to get too detailed, the decision was made that we would bring all 20 clinical domains from the 23.5 million patients, veterans that we've seen since the beginning of when we were electronic back in 1987, into Cerner's data center so that we would have access to that. And so that turned out to be essentially 30 years worth of data, 23.5 million veterans, 77 billion lines of data, 50 terabytes just to get the system primed, so to speak. Those 20 clinical domains were based on talking to clinicians and to leaders. What's the most important for somebody seeing a patient? What was it on the front lines? What do you need to see a patient? And so we focused initially on what we call PAMPI, which is procedures, allergies, medications, problems, and immunizations. Those were the things that we thought was the most important for somebody, walking into an ER. What do you want to know from all those different sites, historical data? But in addition to that, labs, vital signs, notes, radiology, pathology, encounters, appointments, visits, all of those are on the list. And there's another list past the 20 that we'll get to eventually. And when we went to the clinical folks and said, well, we're going to have all this stuff in the data warehouse, so to speak. What do you want to see when you're seeing a patient? How do you want that presented? How far back should we see? What kind of data do you want? Of course, everybody said, well, we want everything. I think that's every clinician thinks that they are going to use all that data, that they might need some of that data. They don't want anything left behind. And so, so we were fairly generous in when we were configuring the system with the clinical councils about, well, how much data do we want? How is it going to be presented? And so when we went live in our first site, really for the first time, there were clinicians who were seeing a unified picture of the patient that showed their historical data that we brought over, that were showing data from other sites, other VA sites, that were showing data from other DoD sites, and we're bringing in Commonwealth data as well. So that was really the first time that people who were in the VA system were seeing that level of interoperability, where they didn't have to go and search for it. Before we had ways that you could go look things up, but it wasn't in your workflow. And what we found in that initial go live was sometimes that really gummed up the works and really caused confusion. It caused a lot of time trying to reconcile all that data, trying to understand all that data, wondering what you could trust. Was it right? Was it relevant to what they were actually seeing the patient for? And so we learned some lessons and made some adjustments right away that maybe you don't need 3 years worth of data for everything. Maybe you only need the last 18 months. And, we've made some various adjustments, but I think what it really revealed was interoperability is wonderful, but people don't really know what they're asking for until they see it. And there needs to be ways there's a lot of preparation that needs to be done with the data, but once that data is there needs to be ways to organize that data and present that data so that it is manageable in a patient encounter. And again, we can have a whole nother webinar on what to do about reporting and those kind of things. But just when we're talking about just the clinician and the nurse and the pharmacist in front of a patient, how do you organize that data and manage that data so that it is relevant to what they're doing, easily understandable, and the computer actually helps them take care of the patient instead of just throwing a lot of stuff at them that they don't know how to process and seems just to get into the way. And I think that's the real challenge. And I think, again, when you ask clinicians what they think they want and what they think they use is different than what they actually do. And I think getting to a place where we can really understand the data and see what people are using when they see a patient, how many times do they actually reference this, will actually be helpful, because I think many of us who are clinicians feel, well, of course I look at every bit of data, of course I'm taking the big picture, of course, I'm being very thorough and conscientious. Well, maybe we are sometimes, and maybe we're not. And what does it really take to take care of a patient safely in a truly interoperable world, I think is something that we're going to need to iterate on. So I will stop there and certainly be happy to answer any questions or add to that if there's questions. Hopefully that was a good foundation.
That was great, Laura, and we're definitely going to come back to you because I have a bunch of questions for you. But Craig, let's turn to you for a moment. So we've got these modern APIs now. Can you talk a little bit about how that can help us address the challenges? And talk a little bit about Wellsheet. So kind of what do you do out there in the field?
Absolutely. Thank you, Jen. And just to keep the trend going here, I do want to give a shout out to the St. Peter's Peacocks, which unfortunately lost in their Cinderella run on Sunday, as the Jersey person on the call here. But yes, thank you. So EHR usability is really at the core of the challenges facing our nation's healthcare system. EHRs can burn out clinicians, they can delay care, and ultimately can impact the quality of care that patients, or in the case of the VA, veterans who put their lives on the line for our country, receive. And it's imperative to introduce solutions to these issues, which really have become unsustainable, reached unsustainable levels, especially amidst the pandemic. The good news is that there is no better time than now to embark on EHR optimization efforts, with far better EHR integration now possible through these modern standardized APIs like FHIR that the leading EHR vendors have built out and made accessible to third-party innovators. So Wellsheet integrates with these APIs and really predicts what a particular physician needs to know about a particular patient to surface an optimized, contextualized view of that patient's medical history that really highlights what's most important for that individual physician-patient interaction. So it's really sorting through all of the data that's available to be able to find the right information to present in the clinical context. And this is incredibly important when you have the volume of data that organizations like the VA are managing on their patients. So really, as interoperability increases and more data is exchanged and generated on patients, the ability to prioritize that content for clinicians becomes increasingly important. And then Wellsheet learns as physicians interact with our system to get better and better at predicting what to show over time. So we're always looking for trends and the ways that clinicians are interacting with the way that we're presenting the data to them, so that we can learn about their preferences and identify patterns and get better at presenting the right information by default moving forward. I also want to mention that with any EHR implementation, especially incredibly complex ones like the VAs, there are a few major issues that really tend to come up and stand out. One is training. EHRs are incredibly complex systems and can take weeks or months to get accustomed to. EHR implementations are also associated with increases in clinician burnout and losses in productivity. And Wellsheet obviously doesn't completely eliminate these challenges, but certainly lessens them and eases the transition for clinicians. It makes training easier by providing really intuitive views and functionality that makes the EHR easier to use. It's also been shown to decrease time in the EHR by as much as 40% for physicians using Wellsheet at health systems like RWJ Barnabas Health in New Jersey, which leads to decreases in burnout and increases in provider productivity. So there are solutions that are available to EHR usability challenges, and the opening up of these APIs in the industry really creates an opportunity to be able to introduce those solutions effectively.
I'd love for Craig and John, give us, a couple of real life examples. So what can we do now that we have these APIs in EHR? So what could a patient do now that they couldn't do before? John, you want to?
Yeah, sure. Sure. I mean, I think, for example, the patient says, I've got a mobile device and I'd like to have bring all my clinical data together. So I've got a précis or a summary of what's going on, either for me or for a parent or for a child or whatever. It's a lot easier to pull that kind of stuff together. And you see, the Apple, for example, having software development kits that enable you to do that. Similarly, if you're a life sciences company, you can say, listen, I've got people on trials and I want to serve up on a mobile app a series of ways that they can record symptoms, record, how well they're taking or not taking the medication. So I can really track how well my therapy is working. I have the ability to do that. So one classic example is using, these mobile devices to aggregate data, whether for you, the patient, for your care, or because you're part of a clinical trial or research, et cetera. And I think as Craig mentioned, one of the things is if you say, I've got a sort of core EHR and surrounding that are a series of resources, and a resource that might be a decision support alert, a resource that might be a set of data that Laura mentioned from somewhere else, is rather than have to click out to go do that, you do it within the context of, in the middle of the EHR. So it's an embedded set of interaction, which means, and we all know, if you take extra steps to click out, it's not going to happen. All of a sudden the use of that just fell off the face of the earth. People will do it if it's in the workflow. They will struggle to do it if it's not. So I think it is aggregating clinical data for the doctor. It's aggregating clinical data for the patient. It's bringing together decision support resources, to help you think through a genetic test result or a variety of other things that are the examples of what is being done. There are literally, Jen, there are literally hundreds and hundreds of examples of people bringing together really novel applications, novel ways of looking at data together to make it easier for the patient, the caregiver, et cetera, to do the work they need to do.
Craig, do you have some examples you can give us to kind of demonstrate the value?
Yeah, absolutely. So through these modern APIs, Wellsheet has access to all of the data that exists in the EHR system on patients. And so in addition to being able to present these really intuitive, user-friendly views for clinicians that help them navigate the patient chart and do the chart reviews much more effectively, We can also do things like provide real-time notifications to physicians about new data that's hitting the chart. So we've heard many examples of this improving care from clinician users. One example is that a patient had elevated lactic acid levels overnight. And we were able to send a real-time push notification to the physician on staff covering that patient through WellShoot's mobile app. And they were able to ensure that that patient received the care they needed in a timely manner, whereas that might have been missed overnight if not for that notification. This relieves the burden on the physician because they don't have to keep checking the chart to manage these patients and really monitor whether these results have come back. Or these values have changed. They can be notified and be relieved of having to keep checking that chart. It's obviously a win for the patient, right? Getting better care from their physician as a result of having access to this tool, and it's a win for the health system as well, which sees improvements in physician productivity and turnaround times for key next steps in care that are required for patients, which result in operational efficiency improvements across the system over time. So it's really a huge step forward to be able to have these tools that complement the EHR and extend the functionality and really augment the EHR's purpose is around providing better patient care to patients and delivering on a lot of that promise in conjunction with the EHR itself.
Great. I think that's really helpful for folks to hear. Laura, I want to go back to you for a second because, you know, the VA journey is so unique, of course, to that organization. And I think, tell me what you think about kind of where the VA came from and how likely is it that some large health plans might be able to do similar things?
Well, I think the VA is definitely unique. I think, you know, I think most organizations would say, you know, 50 terabytes of information is too much to bring. We're not going to spend the money for that. They're going to, you know, somewhat limit that more. And I think the other part of it is we did it because we had a high level of trust in our historical data, some of which was probably justified, some of it maybe not so much. But nonetheless, you know, we felt that we had good data. We know that we have good data, and that's why we decided to bring it along. But I think, you know, the investment of time that we took to ask our clinicians what they wanted, you know, checking the data, configuring the data, you know, trying to figure out what is the right way to present that, took a tremendous amount of time and effort and dollars. And I think, you know, having some, I don't want to say standards because I think that's too strong a word, but some conventions along that line. I think, you know, healthcare, electronic health record vendors tend to say, well, what do you want? And so, but having some tried and proven strategies that work, having some experience with this would be helpful so that you can tell a clinician, yes, you know, you think you want this, but here's what's worked in other sites. Here's what a typical, you know, type of thing. And here's, I think the other part of it is, here's what we're going to present to you in your workflow. If you need to get to more things, here's an easy path to get to that. Because I think that's what people, you know, 90% of the time, you don't need everything about a patient. I'm a primary care provider. I don't need to know everything that the podiatrist said last week. But once in a while, I might need to know that. And how do I get to that? So I think having some kind of, you know, not standard, but industry-wide conventions, but that organizations can start from so that they're not doing it from scratch, because there's a lot of trial and error going on, and that, you know, I mean, we're paying the clinicians are paying the price for that trial and error.
You know, and I just want to comment. So Jeff Englander has put a great comment here in the chat box here. So, you know, you're talking about the difference between what the clinician thought that they needed and then what they actually ended up needing. Everybody initially says they want to see all the information, they want access to all the information. Can you talk about, and Craig and John, maybe you can jump in here as well, but how did you actually determine what they actually needed, and how did you kind of get there? What was that process? What did that look like?
So I'll specifically mention, we definitely brought too much medication data in initially. And so medication reconciliation was taking literally hours. And again, part of that's the redundancy of the VA system, because people have been to 10 VAs and every VA had the same record, et cetera. So part of what we did was just shorten the length of time. We did some deduplication of things. We're working with our vendor to do some of that deduplication on the front end on the technology side, instead of having the clinician have to deduplicate as much. But I will say that we are not where we need to be on that yet. I mean, we don't, we're only live with, well, another site went live this weekend. So too soon to sell. But so I think we are not at the place where we have figured all this out. And I think the other part of it that's difficult is, you can configure it very well for a primary care physician, but what about the nurse? What about the ophthalmologist? What about the pharmacist? All of those, every single person who touches that EHR has a different set of needs for the type of data that they need. And it's very difficult in a big organization with a lot of moving parts to innovate on each of those areas, because it just takes a lot of time. And so I think that's the other part of this, is how do you serve all the users of the healthcare system, and including patients, and not just the physicians, who tend to be the ones that everybody comes to first.
That is such a great point. Craig, you probably deal with that a lot with different clients. Talk about what's the process for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've a broad array of users, physicians, of course, but also nursing staff, care managers, and a wide variety of roles across the health system that depend on WellSheet for access to the patient information that they need to make treatment decisions and to manage care for patients. And what we've learned is that it's almost insurmountable to provide standard templated views that work for everyone, right? There are personal needs and preferences that are so varied that it's very difficult to really standardize every single view. So with WellSheet, we've actually made it possible for end users to modify their views, to tweak their views. So out of the box, we provide, these clinical views that orient the information and really provide better contextual views of the patient's medical history. And we've spent lots of time and effort as an organization working with our clients to define what those are. But we recognize that end users may appreciate having a slightly different view, or an additional data point added to their congestive heart failure view, for example. And we allow for that. And then we learn from that. So we see how different users, different specialties, roles are interacting with these different views. And we're constantly monitoring all of those interactions and studying those patterns. And if there is a pattern that emerges, that's something that our in-house clinical team is notified of, and they're able to review and determine whether there's an adjustment that needs to be made to our default moving forward. So we're constantly learning and getting better as users interact with our system, but also providing that flexibility to the end user to really create the system that works best for them.
John, what's been kind of your general advice to folks who are struggling with this?
Well, I think anytime you get people new to a situation they've never been in before, they're going to have all kinds of ideas about what they'll need, and they learn. It's like I have three daughters who are all first-time moms, and what they think they're going to need as a first-time mom, and what they want to need is not quite the same. And so they learn along the way here. I think there's a couple of categories, Jen. Sometimes the tooling makes it pretty easy. Go get them, Tiger. Do whatever you want to do. You can rearrange the screen. It's easy to do, and you generally find that everybody says they want to do it, but few people actually do it. Go off off and do this. So, but nonetheless, there's a low commitment, low resource expenditure. There could be another category, say, listen, you're an important political actor. I need to give you something here just to keep you on board. So I'll do certain things just for a political reality, frankly, to go off and do that. I think the third thing is to say, golly, I've still left with a bunch of stuff that I could do, and it's really non-trivial to do it, like bring over a boatload of data or doing all kinds of customized enhancements. So the best thing I think you can do there is either through your colleagues or your vendor, where the vendor comes in and says, listen, I've been through 25 of these things. Let me tell you what it's like here. So you bring in somebody who's been down that track, and somebody like them who's speaking from scar tissue and real life experience and respect it. And maybe you'll win that, maybe you won't, but at least you'll have had someone who says, I know what you think you want, but let me tell you the reality of this thing. The other thing you could do is pilot. It says, I'm going to bring over a little bit of stuff and we're going to see what real use looks like, et cetera. And then you can step back and say, by the way, I know we talked about doing all this stuff, but let me tell you, it really didn't happen much. So you don't tell them they're wrong necessarily. You sort of suggest that there might be people whose experiences they can draw upon, or a reality that we can, collectively take a look at.
Perfect. I mean, that sounds like a good way to kind of manage all of those things coming at you. Let me just veer a little bit. We do have a question, and I just want to make sure we cover the AI element in terms of APIs. And Craig, tell me, how does that really fit in here? We've heard a lot about AI. We've heard a lot about voice lately, all of this stuff going into the workflow. How does that fit with, in addition to figuring out the FHIR piece? I mean, it just seems like there are so many things right now coming at organizations. Which of these are actually urgent? And which of these do we want to kind of wait and see what happens?
Absolutely. So our perspective on AI is that it should not be making decisions for clinicians. It should be empowering them to make better decisions themselves and really address the problems that they have with their existing systems, to make usability of those systems better and to make it easier for them to reach the right decisions for patients. So we're, as a company, opposed to providing AI that really drives a physician to a particular treatment decision for a patient. And I think that's really important to not over rely on these technologies that do have the types of, can have the types of biases that some of the commenters have mentioned. But to really use these tools to enable the clinician to get access to the right information at the right time, so they can use their own judgment. So that's one component that I think is really critical to keep in mind for incorporating AI into clinical workflows. And then in terms of voice AI, I think it's a really exciting potential solution to a lot of challenges around documentation and being able to create notes more quickly and effectively. And I think that's a very exciting future for users that does complement other technologies very well, including what Wellsheet does, which is really more visual and the presentation of the right information so that the clinician can interpret that and make treatment decisions more effectively, as well as supporting workflows, clinical workflows around care team collaboration and handoff and these real-time notifications that I mentioned, which allow physicians to react to new data that hits the chart much more quickly for patients. So I think that it certainly plays a role, voice AI, and it's I think something that can fit into the suite of solutions that are required to address usability as a whole. But there's a large portion of the clinical workflow that requires the clinician to have visual access to the right information at the right time. Voice is really not a primary way to interact with patient data in any industry vertical. And healthcare arguably has the most complex data of all. that clinicians have to sort through. So really being able to get access to the right information at the right time, especially as interoperability creates more and more data for clinicians to have to review, I think is a critical component of that.
Yeah, Jen, I mean, just to add a couple of things, I think, when you're trying to improve the interface such that it saves time, is more cognitively digestible, et cetera, you're going to use a variety of techniques. Wellsheet has a very powerful one, but you'll probably use some voice, you'll probably use some other things. And so it's not a tool, it's a series of tools that you apply here. The other thing is, at times, I think we got to be a little careful on AI. We're still early. Sometimes the definition is slippery. I have a colleague who says AI is what the computer can't do today. So AI was when Jeopardy lost the machine, and that was AI. But no, it's no longer AI because it can't do general purpose reasoning. So there's kind of this slippery moving target that goes on. The other thing is, you say, well, AI is statistical pattern recognition, but so is a regression. So it's cluster analysis. They're all examples of machine learning. They're not deep learning, but all examples of. So at times we give it magic properties when it's a category of statistical tools that we apply here. And to Greg's point, we apply it across a range of situations. It's voice recognition. It keeps your car from drifting out of lanes, et cetera. It is making sure that, if you're doing a prior authorization, this, Jen, you do it correctly, et cetera. And then there's this category called, we don't need doctors anymore because the machine will do it. So I think there's this real range. In some cases, it's pretty darn mature and it's pretty darn good. In other cases, we got some learning to do. And in some cases, bias is really a problem. In others, it's off. So what? The fact that it might miss some prior authorizations, that's painful, but we're not hurting anybody necessarily. We just have more effort, et cetera. So I think we're learning about it, and there's a variety of things that can be done. Clearly, you don't want bias because it means the data you think describes what's going on actually doesn't. It's missing something, and you're gonna have an error rate that, for whatever set of reasons, is not helpful. But anyway, I think AI is here to stay. It's powerful. It's a broader category of math that you apply in Wellsheet and other cases, et cetera. And it'll get smarter and better over the course of the years to come.
That's a really great point, and it gets at a question. Mary, you've got a lot of good questions in here today about bias and AI, so appreciate that question. But Mary actually had another great question, which was about, a lot of these clinicians and practitioners and users, are trying to figure out, how do I make this my own and customize it? But how do you really support the team that's doing all the customization to make sure that you're not all of a sudden doing all this customization and it's completely inefficient? Craig, maybe you can jump on that. And then Laura, it'd be great to hear how you dealt with this. Yeah.
I'll comment just briefly. So one is to get the default views as good as possible for as many use cases as possible, and really deliver that high quality initial impression, so that what's required is just tweaking around the edges for the personal preferences of the end user. So that's really our goal, that it really doesn't have to be customized because it's already the exact thing that the user wants to see. Obviously, that doesn't work in every case, so we allow for that flexibility and that end user interaction. We do support those end users to be able to customize easily and effectively. We as a company are very we really emphasize being on site, at the elbow, supporting all of our clinician users, and working with trainers at the health systems that we work with to make sure they're very familiar with the functionality. And we have a very kind of robust support system for our end users, despite the fact that physicians report being able to learn Wellsheet in 10 minutes. It's a very quick and intuitive system to pick up. It's really helps to simplify the experience for them in many ways. But we do feel it's important to also provide that support, especially for those end users who do want to go the extra mile. To John's point, it's not everyone, it's not even the majority of users, but who do really want to have these views personalized and customized for their particular needs. That's something that we'd like to be hands-on and support them to achieve.
Great. And Laura, how about at the VA? I mean, how did you kind of make those decisions about who jumped to the front of the line and got those customizations?
Well, we had a saying going in that we were going to configure, not customize. And our definition of customization was something that really required new code that was really not in the system. And I think, one of the cultural transformations that we're undergoing in the VA is that, CPRS Vista, around for a long time, but really the screen looked the same no matter, where you went and who you talked to. I mean, there really wasn't very much that the user could do. The newer EHRs have a lot more configuration that the user can do. There's a lot more bells and whistles, and part of our mantra at the beginning was just, you can't make this into Vista, and that's a lot of times what the customization wanted to be. And we want to go back to what I'm used to seeing, and that it takes some time to learn the system to understand really, how you can best use it, what you really need, and maybe, so there was somewhat of just, take your time and learn the system before and use the system before you make any big decisions about changing things. Really, I would say many of the things that we ended up changing in the early days were things that really are different about the VA rather than about the EHR. So, there's things that we have that, nobody else has, service connection as being one example of that. So, we spent a lot of time trying to deal with those kind of issues of where the VA doesn't do things the same way. And really, wanted the users to try and spend some time to learn the system. We do have a system for people can request things. Obviously, we've made hundreds of changes since then. But I think that's still a work in progress of how, and that's where I think having something where, we can give the users a toolbox of here's the things that you can tweak for yourself. Here's enough understanding that you kind of understand what you're trying to get to. Because many times they would ask for something, it was there, they just didn't know it was there. So you have to get to that, and you have to have people on the site, informaticists who are trained that can help them get to those answers, because you can't expect every user to be at that level of knowledge. They shouldn't have to be. But we're still struggling in that. I think, we're really just in the front edge of this. And it's a huge cultural transformation to go from a very beloved EHR, that's over 30 years old and has been specifically designed for your healthcare system to something new and different. That's the challenge we're in right now.
Laura, while I've got you, let me ask you two quick questions, as Julia's had these in for a while here. Is the data, can it be shared with non-VA locations?
Well, I mean, through Commonwealth, I mean, that is the pathway to our community care providers and other healthcare systems. And obviously, patients can download their data through Blue Button as well.
Okay, and then one other quick question. How about medical imaging? Is that included in it as well?
So yes, we are looking at, imaging has not been part of the data migration yet, but there are plans for that to happen, yes. Okay,
and then great question there about downloading data. So we did have a really interesting question here from Chanip. I'm sure I'm butchering your name, but I'm gonna do my best here. Chaniapin. So John, I'm gonna actually tag this to you. So when people are trying to download stuff, sometimes vendors give them a hard time about it, and this is perceived as maybe information blocking. What are the options really for patients who are having a hard time getting some of this information?
Yeah, I think, Jen, people, can encounter hard times because sometimes it's the vendor, sometimes it's the provider using the vendor system, so right. There can be multiple actors here that are making it difficult. ONC is now receiving information blocking complaints. So I think if one believes that, hey, listen, this is above and beyond, and I think there's going to be this, we'll have to sort through this kind of gray zone and all that stuff. But nonetheless, you see, I'm being stymied here in what I really want to do, and this doesn't seem to be in accordance with the regulation or the spirit of the law. Check out the ONC websites and I think initiate the complaint process. So anyway, they're receiving them and they're beginning to take a look at them, but that's the major recourse that you have, short of saying, well, I'm going to dump you and move off to a vendor that's a little bit more supportive of what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, great. Very helpful. Esther's got a great question here about our small EHR vendors represented in HL7. Yes, Esther, they are. There's lots of all sizes vendors working with HL7. So that's a big yes. Question here about open source. Would an open source public site facilitate moving to interoperability standards? Anyone? John, you want to grab that?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, depends on what would be quote in the open source side. I think what I might do, 'cause I think it's a fair question, is reach out to Chuck Jaffe, at HL7 and just say, to what degree has this been talked about with the HL7 board or the HL7 accelerators, et cetera. I actually don't know to what degree this has been explored. HL7 is nonprofit. I mean, there's all kinds of reasons it has for accelerating the adoption of FHIR and easing the challenge. It doesn't sell code, et cetera. But anyway, and I think, Jen, maybe we can put in the.
Yeah. And Chuck's actually on today. So Chuck.
Oh, is he, Chuck? Terrific.
Yeah, so Chuck, hey, we're calling you out if you want to stick something in the chat box there. I'm sure people would
fair enough,
to
Chuck.
see your response or get in touch with you. So great to see you, Chuck. Another question we get a lot is about security. So Craig, what about security or NPIs?
Yeah, so security is of critical and utmost importance and top priority, and for us as an organization, and should be for any organization dealing with sensitive health data. I would say that the APIs, because they are standardized and because they are officially sanctioned by the EHR vendors and controlled in terms of the way that these applications are authenticated and surfaced to end users in a fully HIPAA compliant and secure manner. I think that there are security advantages to these modern API-based integration models that the traditional interface building way of integrating that John mentioned has been the mode of EHR integration for quite some time, is not necessarily as robust around. So I think it's incredibly important to really have systems end to end, very hardened from a security perspective. And I think the APIs are actually a good component in that end to end hardening to really ensure that the way that these technologies are connecting to the EHR is done in a compliant and secure, rigorous fashion.
Great question here from Ed Hammond. So with many people making APIs for similar purposes, we're spending a lot of time kind of reinventing the wheel. So anybody have suggestions in terms of a strategy for standardizing and sharing these APIs? Just open up to all of you. John, thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think, some of the, there's a lot of, I think, each of the vendors has to do their sort of instantiation and creation of the APIs. So, Craig will do it for his stuff, Epic will do it for their stuff, and, all that stuff. And there's still this sort of migration we're in the middle of, going from public FHIR-based APIs to private APIs that the vendors have used, et cetera. So they're kind of straddling all of that. So I think, a lot of that code you can't really share, or it's just messy. It costs you more to reintegrate somebody else's code than to do it on your own here, et cetera. So I think there's going to be some inefficiency because there's unique instantiations of a common approach to certain things. So I think it is, there's an opportunity within the HL7 community and in the federal community to reduce the amount of rework and redundancy that's going on, but knowing that there will be some because of each one's got to have their own sort of special, secret sauce or special way to deal with their code base. And, Craig's probably seen this too, the work that he does and in dealing with the HR vendors as he does.
Yeah, and I think they've done a good job of trying to share as much knowledge about how to implement the APIs as possible to reduce that level of rework from one vendor to the next as much as they can. I think John's point is right that there will always be some level of individual instantiation of these APIs from one vendor to the next. But there are shared implementation guides and programs like the Argonaut project is one on the FHIR side that was really built around how to implement the FHIR standards from one vendor to the next. So there are communities that have emerged and a lot of support. I think it's been really encouraging to see the level of collaboration and vendors helping each other out to achieve these standards in a way that all can benefit from. And I think that's a testament to the shared value that these types of advancements are creating for the healthcare industry.
Laura, one question that we got online, actually, which we haven't really discussed this topic today, is clinician burnout. I know, VAs, everybody's really struggling with clinician burnout. How can this assist with that?
Well, yeah, clearly, I mean, being overwhelmed by information along with everything else is just another, straw on the camel's back. And clearly, we saw the strain on providers who were trying to manage, too much data that they weren't familiar with and didn't really understand why it was where it was. So this is critical, and I think we really have to get it. I mean, if the EHR is actually helpful and it helps organize things for you, it's going to help clinician burnout. But right now we're at a place where it's often seen as the enemy, and we need technical ways to help this. Like I said, some of the deduplication that can be done technically, but also, very much in the way it's presented and the way that it is configured for that particular user, so that they're seeing it the way that it helps them do their job. That may mean that they have to change how they think about their job a bit to be able to, be with the majority. It may not be just personal to them, but once they get to that place, it streamlines things, and then it really will help with the burnout problem. But we've got a long way to go for that.
We're almost at the top of the hour, so I'd love to just kind of do a round robin here and give each of you, what's kind of the one piece of advice you would give folks out there in terms of moving forward with this. We'll start with John, and then we'll go to Laura, and we'll end up with Craig here. So kind of your quick 20-second words of wisdom and advice. John.
Well, I think, and you have it, this sort of link to this article, I'd look at the last portion of this thing, which basically says, become conversant with the rules and the regulations. There's a lot of people who've written about them, et cetera. Join the community, because your voice is important in making these things happen. As appropriate to your strategy and plans, begin to migrate to the FHIR standards and begin to explore this amazing range of novel uses and leverage of these standards like Wellsheet. So anyway, there's a short list of 4 items here, words to live by. Cut it out, put it on your refrigerator, and your life will be better.
Great. Laura.
Yeah, I'm optimistic despite the challenges. I mean, this is when I first started medicine, I would go down and find the lab slips and try and find the paper chart. We're in a whole different world, and we just need to use our experience and data to improve things, which is what we in informatics are supposed to do.
Great. And Craig?
Yeah, I would just say, I think it's time for a mindset change about what can be done to address these EHR usability challenges. For so long, it's been too costly and burdensome to introduce solutions that really optimize the EHR and provide better functionality for end users. These modern APIs change that. They allow for solutions like Wellsheet to be deployed in less than 30 days and just very lightweight deployments, implementations to be able to introduce Wellsheet or technologies that support clinician burnout, addressing clinician burnout in a much more efficient way for health systems. So I think it's important to consider these technologies and really ensure that you explore the FHIR APIs as a way to integrate them as well.
Great. Well, this has been an incredible discussion. I want to thank Laura, Craig, John, all of you today. We will be following up. We'll send out links. If you can't get the article online at HBR, just reach out to us. We'll get you a copy. Thank you to all of our wonderful speakers today. And thank you for joining us. Have a wonderful afternoon.
And well moderated, Jen. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great.